This is the final word story time. Yes, that time again. The time to go away from the present and go into the past where the tales of cricket live. Geoff, Lemon, Adam, Collins, who's wearing a cricket jumper and holding a cricket ball. It could not be more in the zone at the moment to get ready for this day of, well, whatever stories are going to come up. I've got a couple. I know what they are. Adam has a couple. I don't know what they are. The show is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn, as it has been through this season, the number one plaintiff law firm in the Commonwealth of Australia. And Adam, it's good to see your face. You seem well.
Yeah, it's cricket jumper weather. So I've learnt living here for a long time now that summer arrives slowly, progressively. You get sort of the green shoots of spring. You get the smell of the cut grass. You get the season starting, but it's not yet summer. And then suddenly you're in the middle of summer and it's hot. And of course, the infrastructure in the UK isn't that well built up for hot weather. So you really feel it for a few weeks. But then autumn arrives suddenly, and that's what we've had this week. It's gone from T-shirt weather to cricket jumper weather in the blink of an eye. So given I've got this lovely ICC number floating around in my pile of cricket debris, which will get put away in about a month from now. I read a lovely piece that Gideon wrote on Cricket et al. Yesterday about just starting their pre-season nets with the Arrows. And I dropped him a reply saying, like, I really felt that email. Like, I wish I was starting my pre-season again right now because, of course, our season will end and I won't play for a time. But, yeah, it's been a...
You could be. You could be a little bit. You'll play a little bit in Australia,
of course.
So
yeah,
this might be pre-season. You could consider this your pre-season.
Well, it's a good point, actually. I'll play a game in October. Then will I play a game in November? Like, probably. There's a weekend I'm back in Melbourne. I'll look to play for my original club in Endeavour Hills if there's a fixture that's suitable there. There'll be a final word game in December.
Get a final word game up in Melbourne.
There'll definitely be a final word game against the Reds in December. I just need to organise the date with the Reds, and there'll be a cricket media game. Yeah, I'll play probably every month, which is nice. Anyway, so that's where I'm at now. And yes, 2:38 in terms of this particular story time. There's a Kane Williamson 2:38. I've got a feeling, Geoff, this was one of those scores that was a Rick Finlay. So
I think that was 229 was there and 25.
Or whatever it is now, I've got a feeling this was one of those
that Tom Latham got. Tom Latham ticked one off.
Well, this was one on that list that hadn't been scored until the January of 2021 when New Zealand beat Pakistan to advance to the World Test Championship final at Hagley Oval, and Williamson made a 238 from 364 balls, which was one of his double centuries. I think he made 2 double centuries in that series, or at least in that summer in New Zealand. So that ticks that off. And for cap numbers, we've had a couple of Australian cap numbers recently from players who departed this year. One of those, of course, being Keith Stackpole. He was the 238th Australian man to play Test cricket. And then for England, 238, Dulip Sinji, who was a interwar England Test cricketer with a remarkable Test batting average, who is a story that we've touched on before, but one of the Indian players who turned out for England in close proximity to each other, of course, with the Nawab of Pataudi.
Yes, and Ranji, his uncle. So you've got the Ranji Trophy and the Dulip Trophy to this day in India, which is nice to have those family links still there. I got a note from Tom Reardon during the week about our answer last week when I was going all around the houses looking for something that would suit a score of 360, and you went, well, it's just got to be Corey Anderson's 100 off 36 balls, doesn't it? Yeah. And it was. Tom said, what a classic. Adam cottoned onto it being Corey Anderson very early and was spot on, as I think you immediately suspected. I did. I knew you were right as soon as you said it.
It's happened many times where one of us has written a 20-minute answer, and the other one goes, "Oh, it might be that," and we're like, "Fuck you!"
Fuck.
But we proceed anyway. We've got 4. I know my answers aren't short today. I mean, they're not Barat length either, but they're not they're not 5-minute answers either. So maybe we should get straight into things. Geoff, what are we here for? What are we doing? Why are we doing it?
We're going to play a game. It's called Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge, the game that we play with nice people on the internet. They're nice because they fund this program. Not only the program, but the entire enterprise, the extended Final Word universe couldn't happen without people jumping onto patreon.com/thefinalword. And when they get there, instead of saying, I'll do a $5 tier or a $10 tier, we say, set your own price and make the number something to do with cricket. And then we will try to figure out what it means. This is how this show goes. Diego Black, new pledger. This is my friend, Diego Black. He's sent in 305 in British pounds. So £3 and 5 pennies. 305. You could interpret that however you want. You could put a decimal point somewhere. You could take one out. Diego says, hello, been a listener for a while and have always enjoyed the show, so I felt I should get involved. That's the spirit. We want to get our patron numbers up from around 800, where they are now, to 974. It's a big jump, but we want to beat Don Bradman's record for the most runs in a test series. And if you can be like Diego, you can help that happen. My clue, says Diego, is he was important enough that he has a road named after him, but I'm guessing he's the only cricketer who has had this honour to have also been implicated in a murder.
Yeah, it's a.
We've had a few murders on the show over the years, haven't we?
We have. It's a punchy clue. Welcome, Diego. Great to have you with us. It's people who got on board and pledged that help us make the show. Also helped us write the book, which is coming out in time for Christmas, in
late November, I think,
at some point, which will be an exciting part of the final part of this year for us. But yeah, we've told the tragic story of Leslie Hilton, the murder he committed and was ultimately executed for, and others which we've touched on, but that's probably the most significant one. Implicated in a murder. I want to say from the outset here that I'm not going to assert that the person who we're about to talk to here murdered anybody, because that would be thoroughly inappropriate, given that there were never charges raised, and someone else confessed to said murder. So I just want to be clear about this, that I'm not going to start accusing people retrospectively of killing people.
Implicated. I think Diego's phrasing is
no. Diego's totally fine.
In.
Diego's wordings, no dramas at all. But I know sometimes there can be a rush to judgment on these things using the Google searches and so on. But anyway, it is still a shocking decline after a rise of a very capable cricketer by the name of Frank Foster, for whom the 305 will become a more obvious number soon enough. But yeah, okay. It's a player who did some remarkable things, who we know very little about, and it clearly relates to the latter part of his life, which was a total train wreck, and we'll arrive at that soon. So he's born in 1889, which is a pretty dreadful time to be born, given he was 25 when World War I broke out. But that's not
what
his,
you want to be.
No, that's not his story. I mean, a lot of guys who we've talked about in the context of World War I, who are about that age, ultimately served. And he did enlist, but at the very tail end, because there's another part to the story which we'll get to later from 1915. But when it comes to Frank Foster, he's from the Midlands. He's not from the Foster Massif of Worcestershire. He's actually from their rivals. He's a Bear. He's a Warwickshire legend, actually, for what he achieved in his brief career there. Born in Birmingham, wealthy family who they had a menswear business, and he went into that trade with them.
Foster's.
Straight after school.
For style.
Yes, his left arm seam and his hard-hitting lower order batting, mid to lower order batting, was impossible to resist. So he played as an amateur. So he was broadly involved in the business when he played for Warwickshire.
Were they the Peter Jackson of their day?
Yeah.
Would they have sponsored Sale of the Century had they been around?
I often thought that Peter Jackson would be a good sponsor of the Final Word. If you're listening and you link to a menswear company, not least Peter Jackson, Adam at finalwearcricket.com. Never miss an opportunity.
Peter Jackson. It's still there all those years later.
It's proof that advertising does at some level work, because you and I both, if we were asked to cite a menswear company and the advertisements that came from it, we would both say Peter Jackson. Anyway, where are we? So Frank Foster, Edgbaston is where he starts to forge his career. He starts playing in 1908 and 1909 when he's still a teenager. In 1909, when he turns 20, he takes 49 wickets in that season. So he's on the way by the time he's reaching the age of 20. Then in 1910, he has his first big hit out as a proper grown-up cricketer, 112 wickets at 21. And as a consequence of him doing so well in that season, an absence of amateurs at Warwickshire at the time as well, remembering you needed to be an amateur by convention to lead the county team, he was made skipper. So at age 21, in 1911, Frank Foster becomes the leader at Warwickshire. And it's an interesting season because it's the first year where they award a number of points for draws. So it changes the whole way that the 3-day competition works. Now, Warwickshire did win 13 of their 20 games in 1911, but it's the new draw or the new way they allocate points, which allows them to win the county championship for the first time. So this 21-year-old who's leading Warwickshire leads them to the promised land on what I'm describing as match ratio 74%. And they only just got over the line, Kent 73.84. So as Sydney Pardon said in the Wisden Cricketers Almanac in 1912, in all other systems used in the county championship back to the start, Kent would have defeated Warwickshire and finished first, but not in the one they implemented in 1911. I thought it must be a great end to the season, like it would have been a great final day, or acknowledging they played different numbers of games in this era as well. So there wasn't like a final day per se. But the last Warwickshire game's an absolute belter, in as far as like Warwickshire thumped Northants by an innings and 33 runs, and the captain, Foster, leading from the front, 5 for 18 with his left arm seam in the first innings, then 6 for 63 in the second. So he was the guy that made sure they would win the pennant. Took 141 wickets in the season at 21, combining that with 1,600 runs at an average in the 40s with 3 centuries. Wow. What does that equal? He's on the boat to Australia for a test debut in the Ashes of 1911, 1912. And he's commissioned to open the bowling with the great SF Barnes, and what a series and what a partnership they proved to be in what was initially cast as Plum Warner's team, but quickly became the team of Johnny Douglas. Johnny won't hit today on the basis of Plum falling ill early in the series. So that's an Ashes series that I've spoken about. I don't remember why, but this came up recently where England lost the first test match, then they go bang, 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 bang to defeat Australia 4-1 in a famous victory. And we all know how hard it is for England to win in Australia. So this was significant against an Australian team, by the way, that included Trumper and Clem Hill and Warwick Armstrong. So they're a pretty strong Australian side, albeit one that had some internal rifts which play out ahead of the 1912 triangular, which we've talked about many times, where there were a group of players, including the aforementioned 3, who didn't tour in 1912. But in that glorious summer of 1911-1912 for England, Foster, in his first test series, takes 32 wickets at 21, super consistent across the 5 test matches as well, 7, 7, 6, 7, 5. So you got a sense of a guy who immediately was ready to make an impact. And you throw in the 34 wickets that Barnes took himself, they picked up 66 out of the 95 wickets between them, the 2 opening bowlers, which is a staggering percentage and shows what an influence their new ball bowlers had in bowling long spells all the way through the innings. Plum Warner, who was an observer for most of the series, said, "Finer bowling than theirs I have never seen on hard, true wickets." And again, that's against the very, very strong Australian top 6. A lot were caught in the leg trap. You can imagine as a left armer, this is before bodyline. Bodyline comes up later as well, but they're caught sort of around the corner where there were a lot of catching men. And also, he was in the runs. He made 56 on debut, then 71 at Adelaide and 50 even at Melbourne. So, what a brilliant start to his international career. At age 21, having led Warwickshire to the championship for the first time earlier in 1911, so young, doing it with ball, doing it with bat. What an amazing future this guy potentially had in front of him, or the potential to have a great future in front of him, having achieved so much so young. I mentioned the triangular in 1912 where England retained the Ashes. He doesn't do as well. He still takes his wickets at 18, but it was such a sodden summer that he wasn't as effective throughout the series. However, he still took 100 wickets in the year for Warwickshire, who went back to mid-table after their success of 1911. But that slide continues in 1913. Interestingly, there were no test matches in England in 1913 or 1914. So that's Foster done until World War I breaks out as an England player. So he plays in Australia in 11-12, plays in South Africa, plays in 1912 in the triangular, but that's broadly it. And then World War I breaks out. Before we get to the war, though, we get to our number, which for Diego was 305. Well, in 1914, in his final season, Frank Foster walked out and hit 305 not out in a single day against their old rivals, Worcestershire. And it's been put up by Warwickshire as one of their best 5 innings ever in the history of the county. He walked out at 197 for 3 just before lunch in reply to the 188 that Worcester made. So they were already on top. But the captain walks in, and by stumps, they've advanced their position to 645 for 7. And that's the club's first ever triple century. He's only batted for 260 minutes, doesn't hit a 6, 44 fours, and the mythology of the innings is he didn't so much as hit a ball in the air till he was 150. So I like the idea of, in years that have gone by, the way this innings was sort of spoken of in hushed tones. It was at a ground called, bit of a diversion here, a ground called Tipton Road in Dudley, which was a Worcester outground until the mid-1980s. It was lost to cricket, Geoff, in 1985 when they found a 40-foot hole in the pitch. I mean, I don't know how you can have a hole that's 40 feet to be found in the middle of a cricket pitch, but that's what they found. It must have been.
What do you mean found?
Must have been a crater that
noticed it until
that
point
in there in the middle of the football season. Yeah, I know, right? I just read the line and I tried to find more, but couldn't. But sadly, that was the end for Tipton Road some decades after the game we're talking about. I think we should restore
sinkholes that can develop, that can suddenly appear, but they're like huge craters. They're like a couple of meters or much more across, where a whole house or something will disappear down a sinkhole.
I actually feel determined to find it now. I want to go to the Tipton Road sinkhole in Dudley, and then I don't know, build a cricket pitch there. Let's go back and start again. It's always the way my brain works with these things.
Yeah. Build it at the bottom of the hole. If you've got a huge sinkhole, then you could just dig it out to be the size of a cricket pitch and then just build the pitch down there. And then you can do like a Chief Wiggum style match, have a ladder down the side of the hole.
We can do it. His final first-class game in 1914 is just another reminder of how good a player this guy was. He made 81 and took 9 wickets in a victory over Surrey. So that's Frank Foster's cricketing story, and that's it. So in 1914, he takes 122. And remember, he's 25 then, so it shouldn't be done. I'll explain why as we go. In 1914, he finishes his final season, 122 wickets at 18, in addition to that aforementioned triple century. So he's very much at the peak of his powers when war breaks out. And that's when his life goes off a cliff. He doesn't play again, but that's not due to war service. I might just recap his numbers here because there's no more to add. So he played 11 test matches, averaged 24 with the bat, those 3 half-centuries in Australia, a high score of 71, first-class average of 27, the triple century, one of 7 first-class hundreds. He took 717 wickets at 20 in first-class cricket and 45 wickets at 21 in test cricket. So, to say that as a left-arm bowler, he had the world at his feet is a bit of an understatement. But in August of 1915, it isn't a war injury or anything like that. It's a motorbike accident. He slid on some tram tracks, ended up with a compound fracture in his right leg, which in those days was career-ending, really. And he barely played again. Later in life, he played a little bit in Bournemouth, but that was essentially it. He actually did get declared fit to join the RAF in June 1918, and he was admitted as a pilot, but he was discharged just after the war in February 1919 because he was unfit. He wasn't sort of demobbed. He was said he was unfit to remain in the service. So that's the story of the broken leg that ends his career formally. He tried to get Warwickshire to keep paying him to be their manager, and I think the idea was he'd be like a bit of an amateur captain who wouldn't do much, but he would still bash around. And we know from the post-war years that would have been a totally normal fit. A lot of people came back from war and led county sides as amateurs, but they said no, so he resigned formally as captain, and his life goes off the rails thereafter. Goes back to the menswear shop, but he's kind of forced out of the business within a decade. By 1928, that's over. Mentioned that he went down to Bournemouth briefly, but there are heavy issues with addiction, booze, gambling. He went bankrupt. So I'm sorry to say, it's a familiar story. Like this era, how many cricketers have we spoken about in these horrible decades that bridged the war, who just couldn't keep their life on track?
And especially if you've got the injury, so you've got a compound fracture is complicated, and it probably doesn't heal properly because they don't have the surgery and the options available now, and also you're in the middle of the war. So anybody who's good at medicine is probably involved in the armed forces in some way. So he's probably got this injury which is constantly painful, which never heals properly, and which he's hobbling around on, and that would be an encouragement to get into drinking or whatever else to make the pain manageable, I would guess.
That's definitely how I read it. I read that he self-medicated and basically lost the plot. And he it turns out this started earlier, but we'll come to that later in the answer, I think. So he's divorced by his wife, unsurprisingly. And a year after that, in October of 1931, there's a new twist where he's implicated in the murder that we mentioned in the clue. Nora Upchurch was the name of the woman who was working as a prostitute in London, and she was strangled with a belt at age 20 in a disused Soho shop, and she was there for a couple of days when she was found. Now, there's this bizarre inquest where Foster was a witness, and I'm dealing with research that was done for a book that was written about Foster, which was later written up in a web article. So, there's some brevity here being used by the writers of these articles. So I'm not going to pretend that I know every detail here. If I had access to the biography, I'm sure there's more. But here's the guts of what we know from that secondary reporting. In the inquest, he volunteered himself as a witness, one of 3 witnesses, and he said that he stayed with her the night before she died to help her with food and money. That was the 28th of September. There was the agreement that she died on the 29th. He met her at Piccadilly Circus. He wrote her a check for 10 quid, which bounced. That check was later found, which is why his name was linked in and why he presented as a witness. Right. So he said the reason the check bounced was due to some issues with his house sale in Birmingham. But, it kind of fits into that narrative that he was pretty fast and loose. After meeting her, they went to dinner in Charing Cross and they agreed to stay together that night. So, you read into that he hired her essentially in those terms. She told him that he owed 7 quid, but he hoped the 10 quid check would cover it. And that's what they agreed at the time. She didn't know then that the check would ultimately bounce.
Well, of course, yeah.
Not that she was to know that then. So he stayed until the morning. It was said that he slept in an armchair and left at 7 a.m. There's a whole bit here about how he saw someone else, another man in the room, but the police later squashed that, saying that he was hallucinating, that he couldn't have possibly seen another man in the room on that night of the 28th. But there's a whole bit here there too. He then, the next night, so he left at 7 a.m. Later that night on the 29th, he saw her in Leicester Square, and then he went home, and that was the night where she allegedly died. Now, naturally, with all of that sort of circumstantial weird linkages through there, he was seen as a suspect. None of this came out. A lot of this was written up in 1931 in the papers, but they didn't. The people didn't draw 2 and 2 together about who Frank Foster was. So it didn't. No one knew that this witness was actually the former Test cricketer and
so
something of a celebrity at his time.
No, they did. They talked about.
They did, and they named his address in the paper as well, but no one worked it out. So for a couple of years, he remained. Weird. Yeah, it's a really odd part of the story. It was
some other Frank Foster.
I guess so. It must, but they used initials then, didn't they, to describe people? It was like F.R. Foster, whatever. So this all comes out in 1933 when it goes to trial. He wasn't on trial for the murder though, because after the inquest, the agreement from the officials was that there was no proof other than circumstantial evidence, and also the key bit here was that he didn't have access to the shop, and the other main suspect, Fred Field, did have a key to the shop. And Fred Field confessed in 1933, initially to the newspapers. And apparently this was a bit of a thing to confess to crimes to earn money from papers for saying he did things. So that's what he said, that he confessed to the newspapers that he did it.
A risky way to make money.
Tell me about it. But this guy was a bad guy, as it will become apparent in a moment, or at least a very messed up guy. So he said that he did it. He recanted on his confession after he was obviously found guilty. He wasn't found guilty. It went to trial. He was also found not guilty. So he confessed, recanted. They didn't find him guilty ultimately. They said the evidence was pretty flimsy aside from the key. So there's a lot going on here. But then Field, the same guy, was arrested, convicted, and executed for another murder of another woman in 1936, Beatrice Sutton. Now
that's a coincidence.
Yeah, quite. And then the same thing played out. He confessed to a newspaper, and then later said to the police he didn't really do it. Really odd guy, this Field, clearly. But he later said, after he was convicted and when he was sentenced to death, that he wanted to murder someone and he wanted to die himself. So there's, so yes, absolutely Foster's implicated, but it's worth noting that someone else was convicted. Not convicted. Someone else was linked to the murder by dint of the other murder that was convicted. So this was all going on in those couple of years.
Sure.
So it's obviously...
If your Occam's razoring it, you're like the guy convicted of a second murder 2 years later is a pretty strong candidate.
Yeah. And Foster was clearly a messed up guy who was in her presence the day before, so it's natural that when this all came out in 1933, when Field was being tried, and it was obvious that Frank Foster, the celebrity cricketer, was the witness, and he stood to trial, and he not stood to trial, he provided evidence in the court. So this was a bit of a scandal, but that was in 1933,
Sure.
and that lived with him forever. Now, between times, what happens in 1932-33 is Bodyline. Now, in this period between the murder and him going public to be involved in the murder, Bodyline happens. And in 1932, Jardine goes to Foster and asks him for advice about leg theory, because Foster had, to an extent, implemented it himself, albeit not so much the short pitch stuff, but the leg side trap in 1911, 1912 in Australia. But then when Bodyline blew up in 32-33, Foster totally distanced himself from all of it, wrote an apology to an Australian newspaper on behalf of English cricket and what was going on in Australia at the time, which is really weird. He did in 1933, before the court case, a debate on a gramophone with Larwood, where Larwood presented the case for using the tactics, and Foster argued the opposite point. I'd love to listen to it.
Imagine that gramophone, and then you put it on, give it a spin. You know, you've just come home for an evening out. What do you want to listen to? Let's listen to the Frank Foster Larwood debate.
Yeah, well,
I love side two.
Yeah, the great debate of Larwood and Foster. It would be great to listen to. But
Wendy Harmer is comparing.
That Mike Moore scene on Frontline when Kerry O'Brien steals all his gags. Good times. But yes, that's in 1933. But he's clearly losing his marbles by this point. In 1934, when the touring Australians rock up, he's 45 by this point, and he declares to all and sundry that he should be picked to play and open the bowling for England, that only he could win the Ashes, bearing in mind he hasn't played first-class cricket for 20 years by this point.
Yeah,
he's got one leg that works. He's got the fuck's leg and he's 45. And there's a pattern of behaviour here. In 1946, he's banned from Edgbaston entirely for drunken conduct, which includes at one point after the war, this is in 46, trying to lead the team out on the field as captain because he thought he was still captain.
Oh no!
So there's it's not great. Like, this deterioration. Sad. Obviously, that's kind of funny, but it's clearly really messed up as well. It's not long before he's back in court now for fraud and for stealing and various other things. There's checks that bounce later in life to cab drivers. It seems like a bit of a thing that he does. He writes checks.
Well, and it's a motive, in that other case, if you owe somebody a bunch of money and you owe a sex worker money, and she's somebody who can damage your reputation by telling other people, then there's a possible motive for wanting to shut somebody up.
And that's why the police investigated him. I forgot to mention that. That was the motive that they cited at the time when they investigated him before throwing it out. There's another one. I mentioned him wanting to play in 34. In 1950-51, he invented a fake cricketer that he was visiting the MCC to tell about, and thus missed a court date, who was going to win England the Ashes. He invented a bowler, and he was going into Lords to tell MCC about this bowler he'd found, which was a figment of his imagination.
Didn't exist.
Yeah. So that was the trigger for him to end up in a psychiatric ward, where he stayed until his death in 1958. His papers described him as a psychopath, but mentioned his biographer, Brooke, who did more research into this. More likely than that is there's a link back to that 1911, 1912 success. So it's the turning point in his life in many ways. But in Melbourne specifically, something went down. He was sexually promiscuous at the best of times. And the suggestion is that he contracted syphilis in Melbourne. And we know what that can do to one's
Wally Hammonded himself
mental state. So a lot of stuff's going on above the shoulders, but to an extent, it may have been linked to contracting syphilis in the Australian summer of 1911, 1912. So, he was seen and written of as a prince of the golden age, a man who could have been a king of it, but instead a dreadful decline. So much left unknown, really. And by the way, the road reference, having a road named after him, there is a road named after him right near Edgbaston. A lot of former Warwickshire greats have roads named after him. So Foster Way, which is near the ground with those other Warwickshire players who achieved great things, which he did, especially in 1911, when he led them to glory in the county championship for the first time, and then went to Australia and achieved great things there before a life that from there went in a very sad and sorry direction. Frank Foster. And that's 305 to reflect the triple ton. And that's for our new pledger, Diego Black.
What a way for things to pan out. If you looked at someone's record and you saw great performances and then all done by 1914, you'd only assume one thing about how that had panned out. And in the end, that life ends up in a very different, sad, horrible way, and not just for him, but for everybody else. Well, at least for a lot of other people involved as well, and Nora Upchurch particularly. So, oof. It's a heavy one. It's a rough start.
It is a rough start. I found it hard, researching some of that. Yeah. It's horrible stuff, horrible business. A little bit of its time. Clearly a significant chunk of this goes to other things that were going on in his life. And of course, the murder, which, whilst never been convicted of, being implicated in, and the extent that and the horrible circumstances of that. And the execution of the other bloke who was hanged in 1936. I always find that stuff really off-putting as well. Anyway, Geoff, before we go to our first break and you crack on, I'm going to remind all of our listeners that our coverage is always brought to you by Maurice Blackburn, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm, and the work they do on behalf of hardworking Australian people. Take, for example, their lawyer, Connie, who recently assisted a man who stopped working back in 2012 because of mental health struggles. Despite the fact that he'd been unable to work for more than a decade, they were still able to locate his insurance cover and lodge that claim on his behalf, including getting reports from treating doctors and whatnot. So it was the experienced lawyers at Maurice Blackburn, some of the best in the country, who collected all the material for him. Then they submitted the claim on his behalf. It was accepted within 14 days, and he received close to $100,000. So I mentioned a number of these claims that have been just rejected by insurers. That's one part of this story, but also where you find yourself in a situation where you don't have the means to collect the information yourself. Maurice Blackburn there most of the time on that no-win, no-fee basis that we speak of as it relates to superannuation.
They have offices around Australia. So get in touch, check the show notes, and we will be back in just a sec. It is the final word. It's story time number 238. And mental sharpness. Got to keep your brain sharp to find a nerd pledge. Got to be able to solve those numbers.
Good point.
And a lot of people are drinking new brew to help with that as well. Adam's got a bottle in his fist right now.
Yeah, after I leave you today, Geoff, I will be jumping on the tube. I'll be seeing a Naqshi. I'll be going to the One Day International at Lords. I'm not sure whether it'll fit into our how many days from here on in this ep will be released, but to place you where we are on the Thursday morning. And I'll be meeting with Martin Cook, who's the Supremo and founder and the brains behind New Brew. Quick anecdote about Martin, who played in our final word game a couple of weeks ago, and of course New Brew were well represented, only for the poor guy to have his finger broken and having his season ended by I can't remember, who was it, Alex Horn, who was batting possibly. He was fielding at short cover. I put in a short cover.
It was a dislocated thumb. He went in for the catch. And just popped that thumb out. And it was very unpleasant. But he still got it taped up and jammed a batting glove on and went out to open the batting. So,
which was very brave. And the other colour from that, of course, was that naturally when someone goes off the field with a dislocation, there's like 500 people there. Is there a doctor here? No doctors, but there was a vet, and the vet's like, oh, well, I can kind of do this with animals. I'll give it a crack here.
Hoof, whatever.
And put Martin's thumb back in. So I feel bad for Martin that happened, but I'm very glad that he was part of what we did at Wormsley. And at Wormsley, he had the Discovery Pack, which is the 6 different flavours of the Advantage range, including what I'm drinking here, the Pineapple Crush, one of my faves, but the Cherry Surge, the Berry Fusion, the Strawberry Lemonade, the Apple Pie High, and the Perfectly Peach. And so what they do there is there's the 10 sachet bundle, and it's a little bit more than half price, but I mean, it's a huge discount anyway at $19.95. It's all on that final word page they've set up for us as part of the cricket range. So you go to newbrew.com/TFW, and the Discovery Pack is a great way to give yourself a chance to test out New Brew for yourself. Easy to work out the one that you like best. And then you can continue to enjoy it for years to come thereafter. Newbrew.com/TFW, who we thank for the support throughout the course of this 18th season of The Final Word.
Yep. See if it can help you with your mental acuity, with your sharpness, your alertness, all of the other things that other people who are using it have had good results with. Check it out. See if it's the right thing for you. We have Number 2. It is Ajay, who has been on the show before. It is £3 flat, 300, but it's not a Julio pledge. This is a nerd pledge. It comes with a clue, which is straightforward.
Well, g'day to Ajay, who's one of our very favourite Final Word patrons, because he has done an extraordinary amount of fundraising for the Lord's Taverners. In fact, I don't think there's anyone in our crew who has been more committed to the fundraising piece. Well, there's been lots of them. I don't want to stand him aside. He's of those who have done the most amount, and he's included his family in it as well, and it's a really lovely thing. So, hello, Ajay. We'll see you soon, no doubt. Very simple clue, as promised, but a really interesting story behind the player. He's the 300th player to turn out in Test cricket for his country. Only played one Test match, and unless something dramatic happens, is unlikely to play anymore. His backstory, however, is one that is truly inspiring, even as he comes from a country which has produced players no strangers to hardships in their formative years. And knowing Ajay being one of the most committed Indian fans, you know, we had him in Australia last year, didn't we? Following the Border Gavaskar as well. He does not miss a beat, whether it's the national teams or the IPL. He's across every detail. I'm willing to stake considerable amounts of money, not that I do that type of thing, but I would, that we are talking about the 300th Indian Test cricketer. Am I right, Geoff?
Yes, you are. You are. Well, you've got to be right. Tangarasu Natarajan, whose work we enjoyed so much in Australia a few years ago. Currently 34 years old. So, yes, unlikely to play another Test for India, having been nowhere near any of the Indian sides for the last few years. But one of the more extraordinary rises to that Indian side in the first place. So the kind of career where you could say, revel in what did happen rather than worry about what didn't continue afterwards. The COVID summer of 2020-21, and you may never see again an Indian tour of Australia where they play all three formats, but they did that summer, and they did in a lot of previous summers as well. It was the vogue for a while. 2018-19, they played the T20s, then the Tests, then the ODIs ahead of the World Cup later that year. 2014-15, they played the Tests, then a tri-series, then the World Cup. So they didn't bother with T20s, but there was a lot of India in Australia from November through to March, basically. 2011-12, they played Tests, then T20s, then a tri-series. That one against Sri Lanka, with Kohli had the extraordinary game in Hobart. 2008, after the Test matches, they played one T20 because it was early days of internationals, then a one-day tri-series. And even, 2004, they didn't have T20s, but they'd play the VB series, the tri-series after the Test matches. So there's a random Indian white ball trip to Australia in 2016, I think.
That was a good one.
That's the only non-Test tour where they've played only white ball cricket since T20 internationals began, which is odd.
And that was a good old series, Geoff. If you recall, we followed a lot of it. I have fond memories of that being a series, right?
Canberra, 300 plus in Canberra.
Yeah, I remember. I did that. I remember commentating that game for ABC, which was at the time like a really major thing to have done a one-day international on radio back in Australia. Of course, it still is, but at the time, it was the first time I'd done that in Oz, and we did. I can't remember exactly what we were doing, Geoff, but we were doing things. We were doing ABC kind of things, weren't we? We were writing articles. We were doing Guardian stuff. There was that night where Maxi, which we wrote about in the book, made 97 or something like that and tried to finish it with a 96 and got caught. That was
at the MCG.
And as he said, it was one of his most favourite innings because of hearing Bill Lawry commentate on it like an old school 90s one day that Maxi grew up on. There was Scott Boland debuting. There was who is an Adam Collins favourite who played in that series, Geoff? Who, if I had my way, would play again very soon.
Play again very soon. I was going to say John Hastings because
no. Someone who's very much. He was young then and still active and still doing very nicely for his state.
Oh God,
not there. Could replace Mitchell Starc in theory.
Replace Mitchell Starc.
If Starc fell over tomorrow, would be in the frame.
Wait, it's not.
I'll save you blushes. Midnight in Joel Paris. Joel Paris made his debut in that series. So Boland, Paris, George Bailey was playing in that. There was a really big 100 from Smith when Australia lost early wickets. Kohli went nuts. Yeah, it was a noteworthy.
Rohit Sharma crazy runs.
Yeah, it felt like the games did run to a formula.
Made about 300s in 5 games or something.
Yeah, Matthew Wade made his one and only one-day 100 at Brisbane. I remember that. That was the week that David Bowie died as well. I remember watching that Matthew Wade innings being heinously hungover after going to a David Bowie night till 6 a.m. at Ding Dong. These were all nice
would remember those two things: Matthew Wade's first one-day 100 and David Bowie's memorial.
I remember being slumped on the couch. It was one of those, as I said, all night type jobs, and watching Matthew Wade post three figures and being a lovely thing. Anyway, that's a time in our lives, our first sort of summer doing the types of things we do now all the time, but being positioned together for it.
But if you'd quizzed me and said how many only white ball tours of India made to Australia in the last 20 years, I would have said about 10. But that's it. That's the only one. Right. So curious that that's the case. Nonetheless, it probably won't happen anymore because this year they will come for white ball only, and surely Cricket Australia will split them up so that they get some India juice from a test series in one summer and from a one-day series and a T20 series in another summer. Right. That is what happened on this tour when all three formats were played, though, during the COVID era, and Natarajan played all three of those formats. So Tangarasu Natarajan, as in T Natarajan, because he's Tamil, because he's from Tamil Nadu, that's the format where his father's name is the Tangarasu, is the T, so you use the initial. And Natarajan is the player we're talking about. They're not from Chennai. Like most times if you say a cricketer from Tamil Nadu, they're from Chennai. They're about as far away from Chennai or as far away from the coast as you can get in Tamil Nadu. So there's, in the furthest other corner, there's Uti, which is the hill station that we've talked about before, but that's almost on the other coast. So if you're trying to get as far away from both coasts as possible, you're right in the middle. You're probably near-ish to a city called Salem, and this town is called Chinapampati. And Chinapampati is like not actually that close to Salem, but that's the closest major city. Still takes a long time to get from one to another. It's got a trinity in Salem of religious buildings with the Jamia Masjid, the Christ Church, and the Sugavaneshvara temple, which is dedicated to Shiva, the destroyer. So there's an old Christian building, an old significant Muslim mosque, and an old Hindu temple in this area. It's quite hilly. They grow tapioca, they grow mangoes, but mostly the place is about textiles. They have spinning mills. They make a lot of the silk and the cotton, which they weave to make all of the saris that, in a country of 1 billion people, you need a lot of saris. So Tangarasu, the old man, did that. He ran a spinning mill after the hand mills gave way to electric ones. Very humble beginnings for this family. So nothing flashy for Natarajan. He married his high school classmate from his hometown. They're not Brahmin. So most of the Tamil Nadu players who go on to play for India are Brahmin, as in their high caste. They belong to the sort of the Brahmins, like the warrior caste in theory, but your types like Ashwin and so on they're all Brahmin. They're generally coming from wealthier backgrounds. They've got more access to education facilities, that sort of thing. Natarajan and his family, they grow up very poor. They've got 8 family members sleeping in a one-room house. He's sleeping out in the fields half the time or wherever he can find himself a space. Dad's working at the spinning looms. His mum's cooking food and selling food from a stall. Natarajan's working labouring jobs, very intense physical jobs. And his one out is that he's got a mentor called Jaya Prakash from the local cricket club who sees the potential. So Natarajan's left arm, he's quick enough, and he's very quick in local terms, and he's playing a lot of tennis ball cricket. And this is how things are going in that part of India. And to play tennis ball cricket, he figures you've just got to bowl Yorkers. And so he hones his Yorker relentlessly in tennis ball cricket. And there are various stories of him winning impossible matches for his local teams in tennis ball cricket where they're defending ridiculously small amounts, and he'll come on and nail a Yorker every ball that he bowls and be very hard to get away. So his mentor, Jaya Prakash, is the one who sees this potential and gets him down to Chennai, gets him to play some club cricket. And eventually he works his way up until he gets noticed by the Tamil Nadu authorities, and also he's playing in the Tamil Nadu Premier League, which is their state T20 competition.
Which is televised, and it's quite a big deal. And, when we've been in India before, we've sort of noticed the state-by-state T20 comps can be not as big as the IPL, obviously, but they do carry that status, right? And this is certainly one of those.
bigger and bigger now. That's the one where Ashwin was carrying on after he got given out to a ball that pitched outside leg stump not that long ago. He was very unhappy going off the field in the Tamil Nadu Premier League. So he plays a few Ranji games, but he's killing it in this T20 comp, and so he gets picked up in the IPL in 2017 by Punjab. Then he moves teams, sits on the bench for a couple of years, and then 2020 he really tears it up in the IPL for the first time, and he's the Yorker specialist. He becomes famous as the guy who only bowls Yorkers but never misses them. So he's super reliable. That's the good timing for him, so that by the end of 2020 he's in the frame for at least sort of being around that national level. But he's still, he's coming from a background where not many people know that much about him. He's not a big star player with a big name attached. So he's in the frame, but the reason that he gets to play is because it's the COVID era and because COVID makes things weird. So the Indian team coming to Australia at that time, they've got to do their 2 weeks quarantine in Sydney, but then they've got that very intense bubble that you'll remember from that summer around them as the team, which basically means they don't want to risk having net bowlers. They don't want to have that overlap of having a bunch of local people coming into the Indian camp, into the nets, and then leaving again. Entering and leaving those bubbles. And so they add extra bowlers to their own squad so that they can spare their fast bowlers in the nets. So their fast bowlers who they think are going to play, they want some other good enough net bowlers to back them up. And this is initially what he's picked as. But then Varun Chakravarti gets injured. So 3 days before they leave and go into quarantine, he gets included formally in the T20 squad, Natarajan. He wasn't supposed to even be in the T20 squad to begin with. He was just a net bowler for the tour. After they come out of quarantine, Navdeep Saini has a back problem, so they put him in the one-day squad as well. And he plays the third ODI. That's his first game for India. He's expensive, but he bowls Manas Labuschagne opening the batting, has him chop on. And then Australia need 25 off 3 overs with Ashton Agar batting at the end, and it's Natarajan who gets him out and wins the game for India when they were in a position where they might have been able to lose it. Then the T20 series is outstanding. 3 for 30, 2 for 20, 1 for 33 in a series that's high scoring. India win it 2-1. And Hardik Pandya gets the Player of the Series trophy and hands it over to Natarajan. He's like, it wasn't me, it was him. And presents it himself to the junior bowler, which is, you can imagine the reaction back home to something like this happening. So they've kept him around to have him bowl in the nets to the test squad, but he's not considered to be anywhere near that, right? That's not in the thinking at all. But it's not just that they're missing net bowlers. Coming in towards Adelaide, Raghu, the sidearm expert, gets COVID.
That's right. Yeah.
And he has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So, and he is the secret weapon. Like you remember some of Bharat's stories about Raghu and how integral he is to the entire setup, right? Like he's the one, like Kohli credits him with making India players at the top level play fast bowling better because he's so vicious. He can do so much with that sidearm. Yeah,
he's the first sidearm celebrity. I mean, others have had reputations as being brilliant sidearmers, but usually they're like former players, right? Like this is, and we've also seen, that Natarajan thing, having a left armour to replicate Stark and others.
Yes.
Remember George Garton did that many years ago when England raided Australia. It's not without precedent, and that there's obviously the Ashwin lookalike who's worked with the Australians before for similar reasons. But yeah, Raghu, the side armour, the dog throw, the dog, what do you call it? The
dog stick,
dog stick slinger thing guy.
The wanger.
The wanger guy, that's better.
Justin Wanger.
I hope his nickname is just Wanger. A good nickname. If your nickname's Wanger, you're going okay.
I'd like his nickname to be JL. Just go the full Justin Wanger bit. But
do it.
So that's why he's there is to be Stark. Basically, they want a left armour. So the reason he's there as a net bowler is so that they've got a left armour to face in the nets to sort of to tune up who's going to bowl full and maybe swing it a bit.
Yeah.
But with Raghu out and with the frontline bowlers needing to be pretty limited in their net bowling, like there's a lot of opportunity. So Natarajan just bowls and bowls and bowls in the nets. And he follows Bharat Aaron, the bowling coach, around everywhere and just feeds information off him, just like it is listening constantly about anything he can learn about what to try to do on Australian surfaces. He's going with him on his pitch inspections out in the middle. He's following him around every minute of the day. And he's ripping it up in the nets. He's getting better and better over this tour, and particularly ahead of the pink ball game in Adelaide. He's like destroying players in the nets. He's all over Coley in the nets. And they're getting quite interested in him. And this is the point where Aaron, the bowling coach, but Bharat is like needling Ravi Shastri, saying, you should pick him. Because Bharat's at the nets watching, and he's like, this guy's bowling the best out of anyone in your squad. Pick him. And Shastri's like, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, good one. Because it's just not in the plans at all.
Yeah.
But then the injuries come. Shami breaks his arm in Adelaide. Umesh Yadav's injured after Melbourne. Bumrah and Ashwin go down in Sydney. So they've got Siraj come in. They've got Navdeep Saini come in. But by the time they get to Brisbane, they're out of depth. They don't have any other options. So they've got Shardul Thakur, who's not the fastest, but who can swing it, but he can bat a bit. And they go, well, you've got to bring Natarajan in. You've got to give him the option. And so the time comes, but because he's been bowling so well in the nets, when the time comes, he's confident to play and they're confident to pick him. And he is Indian Test cap 300. He gets Labuschagne out after Labuschagne's moved to 100 and limits the damage there, gets Matthew Wade out and finishes off the first innings, cleans up Josh Hazlewood. He makes one not out with the bat. He says he's never faced pace like he faced from Stark before. He's like, I've never faced bowling that fast. And I think he's talking to Washington Sundar, they're very close. So when, even when he was getting into the squad, Washington was posting up videos, Insta videos and so on, cheering on his teammate. But he's talking to Washington saying, I can't see the ball. I don't know what's happening. Like, I literally can't see it. I'm just going to hope. And I think he gets bat on ball to one ball against Stark, and he's like celebrating it. Like it's the best thing that's happened to him all tour. He doesn't take a wicket in the third innings, but he bowls reasonably economically. It helps them sort of set it up, keep that chase kind of manageable. And then Rishabh Pant comes out and does what he does with Pujara and all of the rest of it. So he's part of what is still, and even you look back at it, just the most extraordinary win to be so far down into their depth players, into their bench players, and to have those players be the ones who deliver. Shardul plays well, Washington plays well, and Natarajan plays a role as well. So he plays a couple more games for India against England, a one-dayer and a T20, does his bit, gets Ben Stokes out twice. They win both those games. The T20, he's bowling in the last over to defend not that many and manages to close out the win. And then he gets injured at the wrong time in 2020-21. He misses that whole IPL. So then he misses the T20 World Cup. You've got 2 World Cups in 2 years, but the Dravid era begins around then, and he's out of favour with that setup and just never gets back. The wall saw the end of him. They built a wall. They made Mexico pay for it, and Natarajan couldn't get back in, and there's some thought that the injury might have hampered his ability to land his Yorkers as perfectly as he did. But he's still the biggest star ever to come out of Chinnapampati. He built a cricket ground there. He set up his family. He's built a house. He's still living there. Humble beginnings, humble approach, and the only Indian player ever to make a debut in all 3 formats on the same tour. T. Natarajan, who did his bit when the time came.
A name that we will never forget, I reckon, that group of players at Brisbane from that remarkable win in January 2021.
And the homecoming. Remember the video of him coming back to his hometown, and just the biggest thing that had ever happened there.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, Ajay, for your continued support. And yes, I mentioned before the tabs, but there'll be a lot more to say about what we're doing with the tabs in 2026. We've got a meeting, I think, next week or the week after next, and that'll sharpen things up about what comes next for what we're doing to raise more money for that great charity. Their 75th birthday this year. Chuffed to have been in partnership with them with the Edinburgh campaign, with what we did at Wormsley and everything else. It's a real joy, and of course the other cricket games that a number of us have played with them and that type of thing. So to the team at the tabs, we love yous and can't wait to do it all again next year. Geoff, we're going to pause. We're going to take our second break, and then we're going to rattle through our last couple of answers. It is the final word 238, Geoff. I'm next up. David Peacock is with us, and he's pledging in Canadian dollars, which will make sense later. 521. It's not John Davison, though, Geoff. Not Davo, but it does have a small Canadian link. There is a clue. You read the clue, then I'll do the answer.
Okay. Some of my earliest and fondest memories via ABC Cricket Radio are covering this cricketer, the boy from Altona. He was overshadowed in his career by his more illustrious teammate. Thought you might be able to tell a few stories in Canadian dollars. Another clue. Well, when I think Altona, I think chemical fire. I think the storage tank's catching on fire in 2000 and what was it, 3 or so? I reckon it was Brack's government era stuff. When that was...
I'm more a sort of Coode Island guy when it comes to those types of chemical disasters. Okay. Remember that 1991, the Coode Island? I don't even know where it is. It might be something worth Googling later on today. It's got to be somewhere in that part of the.
Canada's making me think maple syrup, which is then making me think the molasses flood, which is one of the more extraordinary stories. Was it Boston or was it Halifax? Might have been Halifax. It was Halifax where they blew up the harbour because they had a bunch of explosives on a ship that they didn't know were there. But then it might be in Boston where the molasses tank bursts and floods several city blocks with molasses, which sounds funny, but definitely killed a lot of people.
I'm still thinking about Steve Malaxos when you say that, and nothing's going to change it. Right, first of all, great clue from David. Enough hooks to work it out, which is always handy. If you want to give us a clue with lots of things in it, like lots of different dangly bits, that's good. It's better having five things to have a crack at than one. So when it's a clue that's complicated and there's one bit, that's where we can get stuck for 6 months. When it's 5 bits to it, we will work it out. So thank you, David.
Yes.
The boy from Altona.
Hello, Rob O'Neill, who's had me stuck for about 6 months.
Over the Westgate there. So it's about a Vic who's going to be overshadowed at a time when they all kind of were due to World Series cricket, which will become part of this in a bit. He said here, overshadowed by a more illustrious teammate. I would say teammates plural, which I'll explain when we get a bit deeper into all of this. But yeah, hit several final word hotspots as well. Does Alan Hurst, a Victorian, with a big winding action, who for a time was the fastest man in the land, at least according to Ian Chappell, which is what propelled him into Test match cricket, probably before his time. Made his debut in 1973-74 against New Zealand at Adelaide. Chappelli wanted raw pace. He'd seen a bit of this guy. So despite only being 23 and still, I guess, building into his career, he was selected and only got 1 wicket. Not a bad one, by the way. Glenn Turner, who we've, of course, had on the show and spoken about at great length, his exploits in that decade. But yes, after one test, he was left out of the Australian side going forward. He was a big chance to go to New Zealand because, again, Chappelli wanted him on the basis that he thought he was the quickest non-Dennis Lilly option. And this is the time when Dennis Lilly's back goes and has to do that long rehabilitation. But he doesn't win over the selectors, and that means that Hurst has to take a moment to regather, and he doesn't get to start the 74-75 summer with Victoria either. He's got a back problem, and this is an ongoing theme of the Alan Hurst story. These ongoing injuries early in his 20s. Now we know a lot more about that. Now you wouldn't roll them straight back out when you feel fine. You give players a chance to recuperate from these injuries that weren't called stress fractures then. I'm not sure whether stress fractures were a thing in the mid-70s in the same way that nobody ate avocados until 2005, right?
Sure.
Like, I'd never seen an avocado until 2005. They must have always existed. Well, no one had stress fractures till about 2002.
They just called them ouchies at the time. That's all they got a bit of a back ouchie. Yeah. I remember seeing an avocado in a children's book in the must have been like...
No, there is.
There's early 90s, but they called it an avocado
pear. Yeah, there is.
I was
read
confused.
I can't remember what it's called exactly, but you're spot on. The avocado pear is a book that I've got downstairs somewhere. Here, I'll have at some point from the library for the kids. And
that was my first awareness. I have avocado awareness.
Yeah,
according to the CA medical team.
Well, there was no avocado being had in breakfast, so Bernard Salt was happier then. I've got to say, I did go to breakfast with Winnie the day before she returned to school, and she asked for the avocado and salt, smashed avocado on toast. And I did say to her, this is what Bernard Salt has been saying all along. You young people have no interest in home ownership. And she said, what the fuck are you on about, Dad? And I said, don't worry about it. I'll tell you about it when I'm having to bequeath you a home because you can't save up because you're eating too much avocado on toast.
Too much avocado. Bernard salt, a bit of Bernard pepper, maybe a bit of Bernard coriander, maybe a couple of slices of fresh Bernard chili.
And a
That's
drop
how
of
maybe,
Bernard lemon, and everyone's happy.
yeah, yeah, poached Bernard egg, a bit of Bernard dukkha sprinkled on the top if you're really fancy. That's how you do it.
So that's 74-75, and he's got shaggers for probably not the first time. Still does okay, takes 21 wickets that season, and ends up, and that, it's a long and memorable. No, that's not right. I'm jumping too far ahead. Takes 20 wickets that season for the Vicks, gets taken to England in 75. That's a long and memorable tour, but he's a backup dancer. He's the summer newsreader.
Right.
He's the Peter
Lily
Hitchener.
and Tomo or Lily and Tomo.
Yeah, he's the Peter Hitchener when Brian Naylor was reading the news. I'm trying to say he's the weekend guy. He's the in the summers, but he's never getting a go in the Test matches. 21 wickets for the tour, but none of them were in Test matches. Nor did he play any World Cup games, despite being a member of that squad. So 1975-76, he's back in business big time, having had that tour in England. 23 wickets only, but again, injuries hamper it. But he does take 4 in a hurry against the touring West Indies, and he's a chance. But then Tomo emerges, doesn't he? This is the Geoff Thompson 74-75. Sorry, Tomo had emerged properly in 74-75. In 75-76, it's Lilly, Thompson, Walker, and they're not going to part ways with 3 bowlers as effective as those 3. An interesting diversion here that I took in my research was in 1976. He was on the scene with Richie Benaud, who took an international Wanderers team to South Africa. Now, I just thought, I know we've done a little bit on this, but I thought I'd go back and review these in a little bit more depth here. So it certainly wasn't the first international composite team to visit South Africa in the 1970s. Brian Close took a team that was similar to this over in 1974-75, but they'd mostly been in Zimbabwe. A year on, there was another Australian team that had a bunch of Australians in there that went. But then in 1976, it was the March of 1976, they took another team, and it was the team that Benno managed, and Greg Chappell captained, and Alan Hurst is one of the players. They play 3 first-class games and a List A game, later called List A, against the South African Invitational 11, another first-class game against the Board President's 11, and it's the strongest composite team yet to visit South Africa during their period of exclusion. 4 countries represented.
Yeah.
Benno managing, Chappell captaining, Mike Dennis, who was England skipper the summer before, he's there. Bob Taylor, Phil Edmonds, Derek Underwood, who of course would go back multiple times with Edmonds to South Africa during the Rebel Tour era, which I'll come to in a bit. From the Windies, there was John Shepherd, who was a black cricketer, which is noteworthy. From Australia, it was Alan Hurst, who we're talking about, Gary Gilmore, Martin Kemp, Dennis Lilly. So a very, very strong bowling group. Ashley Mallett, who was the Australian off-spinner at the time. Max Walker, who was in the Test 11. And then from New Zealand, Glenn Turner and John Morrison. So it was Hurst opening the bowling.
That's right. It was Turner who was mentioning this. I was trying to remember which interview it came up in that we'd done. But it's an odd one. I'd like to look into it more before sounding off. But it's an odd one for Benno particularly to be involved in, who's someone who is very politically aware. To go, well, let's take a team to South Africa when they're not, when they've been banned from playing.
I think it's just okay, and I'll explain what changes a bit after this, which totally reframes the whole thing. So the international boycott's well and truly in full swing from cricket by this point. Well, let's do the cricket first. So Hurst is opening the bowling with Lilly, and it's said that he's bowling as quickly as Lilly, which is not for nothing, right? Lilly comes back and remains the superstar that he was before the back injury and all that went with it. He picked up his wickets at 18.5 in the first-class games. And then what happens next, a couple of months after they leave the country, in June 1976, are the major uprisings in South Africa that take the whole thing to the next level. There's the Soweto massacre, which brings world shame upon the apartheid regime. There's the Montreal Olympics. I was probably more interested in this. So the Montreal Olympics, this is when New Zealand have cut ties with South Africa on the rugby trip. So that is the last of the sporting teams that visit there. And then 25 African nations boycott the Olympic Games. Like, why is there any solidarity between African nations and South Africa? That's weird to me.
Presumably the ones that are still being run by colonial powers.
But it seems like a lot.
You'd still have French control of some places, wouldn't you? And Portuguese control. And
yeah, but even with that noted, with the colonial ties, I'm still I find it strange that given they were seen as a pariah state by the mid-70s, that there'd be enough goodwill to kind of boycott an Olympic Games over, right? Anyway, that's probably a story for another day. But yeah, there are absolutely no tours from any cricketers between 1976 and 1982. So like after what happens in 76, it's a real all bets are off moment. There's no more World 11s. There's no more privately funded teams. That's just it until 1982. And that's when the Rebel Tours start with England. And of course, they go back multiple times, the sides from Australia in the mid-1980s as well. Anyway, back to Hurst. And
So I just had a glance at this. It's the other way around. It's African nations boycotting because New Zealand still had a sporting connection with South Africa.
Right.
New Zealand were not refusing to play South Africa yet. And so that's why 20 of the African countries had pulled out.
Okay, right. That makes a lot more sense because when I read that, obviously misread that when preparing this answer. I'm like, that doesn't quite tally. So it was about New Zealand still having had a connection, despite New Zealand having pulled out of. As I understand, I think New Zealand pulled out of that trip eventually. But
yes, but they had. But initially they were inviting that trip to still go ahead,
right? Okay.
And so it would have been on that basis.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Sorry for the mislead there earlier in the answer. Back to Hurst. He's in the. He has an injury interrupted consistent theme here. 76, 77, still takes 12 wickets at 18 when he's playing. He's good, but he's not playing too often. But he is back in the Aussie squad to go to New Zealand in 1977.
I'll tell you what, it's New Zealand's biggest influence on an Olympic Games.
Well, and John Walker wins the 1500 in 76 as well, which in now you think about it, could have been a very different race. You look at the Christchurch Commonwealth Games final of 1974, which is one of the great races, and his direct opponent, whose name escapes me now, was from Ethiopia, and presumably the Ethiopian superstar wasn't running in 76. And I'm not trying to diminish Walker's achievement.
They're one of the teams who boycotted looking at this. Yeah.
Anyway. More cricket, less middle distance running, at least for now. Can't rule out having a spin-off show about middle distance running for I Love It. So he goes to New Zealand in 77, early 77, but he's bowling rat power. He's called gloomily unpenetrative in one media report. This is the guy a year earlier they're saying is as quick as Lily. Again, it kind of builds this argument to me anyway. This guy's playing half fit all the time. Whenever his back's not breaking in two, he's bowling, even when it's no good. So, that because of that, playing in New Zealand, his reputation is damaged, doesn't go to the Ashes in 1977, does get offered a World Series cricket contract, knocks it back, interesting. So when the Bob Simpson team's been rallied for that India series in 1977, he is played in that. So he gets his second test match 4 years later. It's against India. It's at Brisbane. A lot had happened in those years, but he's back. He's got his baggy green on again. Now, this is interesting that in this, he's wicketless in his first innings with the ball, but in Australia's second innings with the bat, Australia get 327. They eventually win the test by 16 runs, and Hurst is part of a 50-run partnership for the final wicket. He makes 26 from 23 balls, batting with Tomo. And when you consider that in half of Hurst's test innings, he makes a duck, this is the outlier. 26 in his second test match back, and it proves to be instrumental in that narrow 16-run win, as do the 2 wickets that he picked up in the fourth innings. One of those 2 wickets was Ashok Mankad. Store that name away, Geoff. We're going to return to the Mankad bit in a moment as it relates to Hurst. But he's punted pretty soon after that, so tough gig. And, he's had a moment, but it's not enough of a moment. Of course, he wants more. He's overshadowed, but he gets back and he's overshadowed again. And this is where the clue says about a higher profile teammate of his. The Ashes of 78, 79, where he gets a proper run. Indeed, it's his best year by an absolute mile in all cricket. Unfortunately, the issue for Hurst in terms of public notoriety is that he's opening the bowling with Rodney Hogg. And only a few weeks ago on Storytime, I rattled through the miraculous start to Hogg's test career where he takes, is it 5 fifers in 6 innings to begin or something absurd? To sort of, even though they lose by 5-1 to England, it's the Hogg and Hurst show. Hurst is immense as well. He picks up 4 wickets, then a 5 for 28 innings, then a 7-wicket match. That 5 for at Sydney included Boycott, Randall, Gower on day one. the 7-wicket match at Adelaide again, boycott Randall Gower on day one, boycott and Randall again in the second innings. So, I know that Hogg takes 40-plus wickets, but as the secondary bowler taking 25 at 23 in a series where they've lost 5-1, he's 28 at this point. At last, he's getting his chance. He's very much the opening bowler, and he's at his peak, and he's ready. And then they play 2 more test matches to round out the summer against Pakistan. Remember that he's dominating. He takes a 6-wicket match and then a 9-wicket match. And again, he's enjoying an incredible summer. But what's he most known for in that summer? Well, it's the 4th and final instance of the non-striker being run out. Now, I know, Geoff, you've done an answer on this before, but Sikandar Butt, who was playing for Pakistan in this game at Perth in early 1979, Hurst noticed that he was consistently leaving his ground early, so he flicked the bails off. He man-catted him. So I mentioned man-cad was a factor the previous time that he played Test cricket against India. Well, at the end of the next summer, he's implementing a man-cad himself, and it sounds like rightly so. And interesting that it's the last one, Geoff. I mean, we've seen many instances of man-cads in international cricket in shorter forms, or many, a handful at least. Of course, T20, and other tournaments. But, we have had to wait a long time for another one in Test cricket. We've had 4 between 1947 to 1979 and none since.
Yeah, and you hear about the first one and you don't hear about the subsequent couple so much. And I suppose even in international white ball cricket, the Sri Lanka, the Butler one was 2016, wasn't it?
Yep.
It was a long time ago now, comparatively speaking. So they've... it's happened Ashwin did it in the IPL, but I suppose because there's so much more, there are so many more outlets for people to talk about controversial cricket things, that it's not just that you'll be on the back page of the paper for a couple of days. It's that you'll have all the social media stuff. You'll have a million people talking to you about it instead of a couple of prominent print outlets talking to a million people about it. So there might be more reticence to do it now just because of the not wanting to deal with the bullshit that would inevitably follow, which shouldn't be the case.
So we know about man-cat, of course. We now know about Hurst. The others were Charlie Griffith, who man-catted Ian Redpath, who passed away this year, and Ewan Chatfield, who man-catted Derek Randall, who we were only talking about a couple of moments ago in 1977. So they're the 4: man-cat, Griffith, Chatfield, Hurst. I would call that ultimate dinner party stuff. The 4 test man-catters. You can all be my friend. I'll cook for you. On top of that, his Victorian season's immense as well. They win the Sheffield Shield Victoria in 78-79. He leads that attack all up, 65 first-class wickets at 20.8. So he's flying. He goes into the World Cup squad in 79, and he's part of it. He takes 5 for 21. That's our number here, by the way, against Canada. Remember, this was in Canadian bacon, Canadian dollars, for the Altona boy. And that's it. Never picked again in one-day cricket. Didn't play any further part in that World Cup or any other one-days for that matter. He played 8 one-day internationals, 12 wickets at 17, and went at 3s. Shows what a brutal world it was for these cricketers in that post-settlement era when the full-time World Series cricketers came back into it. And it's kind of where the story starts to end for him too. He does get an opportunity in India in 1979, but he plays 2 test matches there, and he's back this time. He's absolutely fucked, but he keeps bowling. And his captain, Kim Hughes, is desolate. He describes him as no sloucher. I don't think he's ever come off a cricket ground in his life. He's lost everything on his form against West Zone, which is one of the tour games. You couldn't play him anymore. He's still got a lot of cricket left in him, but he could do himself permanent damage. So again, reiterating that he's gone from peak of his powers to again what sounds like a clear stress fracture, tries to bowl through it, but that's it. It's his career done before the age of 30. There's a sadness here that his body couldn't keep him in the game for longer. 280 first-class wickets, and he played 12 test matches and an average of better than 28 in test cricket. So it is a bit of a story of what could have been had he been treated a bit better and not always been rolled out, but I suppose it's a bit of a story of the time. He later went on to contribute in other ways to international cricket, overseeing 200-plus matches as a match referee until 2011. He turned 75 earlier this year. And yes, as we said, a star that burned brightly and briefly, 5 for 21, his best figure in one-day international cricket. That's Alan Hurst for David Peacock.
Very good. Thank you, David, and thank you for getting the Canadians involved. one way or another. We got one more number on the show today. It comes in from Ian Wolstenhome, long-time pledger as well. The number is £1.60. And, Adam, it comes with a clue.
It does indeed. We've had Ian with us before, and we're really great to have him back with us again. Thanks, Ian, who's been a correspondent of mine on social media for a number of years as well. Right, so his clue is second match that he attended, an innings by a batter with huge appetite, the final test for a Dutch leggy, a pace legend who went a series too far. Am I cheating, asking for two or three stories in one? Dutch leggy, Bob Holland, 1985. That's what I think. We'll see if I'm right there. And a pace legend who went a series too far. That'll be Tomo. And an innings by a batter with a huge appetite. That'll be Mike Gadding. There you go. That's just looking at the clue. I don't know. I might be wrong. We'll see. This is yours to answer.
It tallies with what I've put together. I'll just say that off the top. So yes, huge appetite. Something of a cliche to rest too much on Mark Gadding's shape, but yes, that's the way that he might be described. 160 that he made against Australia in 85, and 160 is the clue, and that's, from what I know, that'll be Ian's vintage as someone who would have been a younger fan at that game at the time.
Yeah.
So fourth test of 6, very level. England go on to win the last 2 by an innings, so retrospectively you would see it as a fairly heavy defeat, but it's 1-1 and then 2 draws, and this is the second of those draws, so it's a tense series. It's Gower captaining, obviously, so we've spoken about this series when interviewing him as well, but this is the one where, so Gadding's made his first 100 in England, and I think he'd be late 20s by this point, so it's not like he's a young buck on the scene necessarily. It's taken him some time to have this breakthrough innings, right?
Yeah. Well, he was young when he started. When he played in the late 70s, made his debut in Pakistan, and in that interview that I did with him earlier this year, he spoke of the fact that it had been a bit of a thing in his career that he hadn't had that sort of big moment on home soil. So he sort of made up for lost time here.
Right. So this situation, this game, it's series very much alive in terms of, the bit in the clue about a pace legend going a series too far. Well, Thompson's not playing in this match. He plays in the next match, but not in this one. And you probably couldn't apply pace legend so much at test level to Paul Allott, although it is his last test match as well. 13 tests that he ended up playing. It's also the last of Jonathan Agnew's 3 test matches.
I didn't realise that. Agus played in the 85 Ashes as well.
Did, yep.
In my own mind, I thought his tests were restricted to 1984. There you go.
A couple there and then this one.
One here, okay.
So it's a game that England probably should have won from their position, but it is played at Old Trafford, and I thought you'd enjoy this, Adam, the description, the match report description from Wisden. Quote, an impossibly sluggish pitch. The ground staff protecting a pitch that had been inexplicably wet at the start. It offered no pace and a low bounce. Imagine that. Imagine a shitty pitch at Old Trafford. It was too slow and did nothing.
Yeah, that's been, it's a shame because its reputation between those two eras, if you like, between the mid-'80s and now, was that it was the fastest pitch in the land, wasn't it? So, well, near enough to it, that in the Oval, going back a little ways now. But yeah, that could have been a version of the description of the pitch they played on a month or so ago with England and India, when that was that got deader by the day, deader by the hour.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what they're dealing with in this particular situation, is that there is very little life, very little anything else going on out of this surface. But Gower is skipper, sends Australia in. It's kind of a classic Australian 11 of mostly second-rung players. Like, you've got Kepler Vessels, you've got Hilditch, you've got Greg Ritchie, you've got Flipper, as in Wayne B. Phillips, not Wayne N. Phillips,
Yep.
Greg Matthews, Simon O'Donnell, Geoff Lawson, Bob Holland. So, probably the only real top-tier players there are Border, Boone, and McDermott, I'd say. Yeah,
I wonder who of the because obviously it's heavily depleted because of the Rebel Tour, which was I'm trying to think who would have played from the Rebel Tour. That Alderman would have gone, having done so well in '81. Kim Hughes wouldn't have, because he was already largely dealt with by. I mean, he was technically still an Australian player when he played in the one days earlier in '85, I think. But other than that, not sure how many of the first choice. Rodney Hogg, who we touched on before, I suppose there's a world where he might have still been part of it. Carl Rackerman. It's an interesting tour group that the guys. John Dyson, maybe possibly by that point. But yeah, it's like that. Those compromised Australian teams are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of they've got cult levels. Geoff Lawson's probably better than that, but players like Greg Ritchie and so on who have their moments, but they're remembered with that kind of more as cult players than as absolute frontliners, I suppose.
Yeah.
So the clue did say
the only guy in that team who you look at it, like you zoom out and you look at it and think about who had careers that would go down as like excellent Test careers would be Geoff Lawson and Geoff Lawson.
McDermott.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Craig McDermott. McDermott. Yeah, of course as well. Yeah, but it's Lawson who throughout the 80s was one of the heaviest wicket takers in the whole decade in Test cricket. Kepler Wessels, who had an unusual career for obvious reasons and came back later. But yeah, the rest of them have had careers that had moments, of course, but not. Greg Matthews would be happy with his returns as well. But most of them, for one reason or another, didn't really have the standout Test careers that you kind of look back on for guys who are in a Ashes squad together.
Yes. So the clue said final test for a Dutch leggy. It was not the final test for Bob Holland. There might have been moments when he wished that it was the final test for him for a little while. Maybe it should have been, because not only does he take none for in this match, he goes on to take none for and score a pair with the bat in Birmingham. Then he goes on to take none for and score a pair in Brisbane. So 3 consecutive games he takes none for heaps. He tons up. Then he concedes 95. Then he tons up again in those 3 0-wicket innings and gets 2 pairs with the bat. And all of those bowling performances are single innings. So it's a pretty rough trot. But he's lucky that the next test is at Sydney, so they pick him there because it's a spinner's wicket, and he takes 10 wickets in the match. So after 3 consecutive 0-wicket matches, he takes 10. Expensively, concedes 174 against New Zealand, goes for a ton in the first tick there with the ball as well, but he takes 6 for along the way. So Bob Holland goes on. He plays at Perth, takes a 3 for and a none for in those 2 innings. New Zealand win that game, win the series. He gets left out against India in Melbourne and Adelaide, comes back for Sydney. They're like home ground, Sydney, spin specialist, and India makes 600 for 4. The top 3 all ton up, and his only wicket is Gavaskar for 174. So that is the end of his career after Sydney, when he can't do anything against India. But it's not quite the end of his career in Manchester, which is the game we're talking about. So yes, Boone, Border, McDermott, Lawson, the kind of top draw names. They make 257. Phil Edmonds, who you mentioned earlier, left-arm spinner from England, and John Embury, the off-spinner, they wear away at them. It includes Border getting stumped, which is interesting. So I looked at that because it didn't happen much. 265 hits. He got stumped 9 times in tests, and 3 of those times were after big scores, hundreds or double hundreds, when he was having a gallop. So only 6 times that he was stumped relatively early in an innings, but he charged past one, I think against Edmonds for some reason, early in this innings. You got Boone and Flipper and Simon O'Donnell make some mid-range scores to get them something in the first innings. Both of them keeps on plugging away and ends up taking 4. Gets them out just before the end of day 1. Crucially, the next day, David Boone drops Graham Gooch and he drops David Gower, and they go on to make 74 and 47 respectively, lay a platform out of the top 3, and that lets Mike Gatting and Alan Lamb come in and bat long, take it into day 3. There are lots of rain breaks too, so they keep losing bits of time for rain. So Gatting and Lamb at 156 bat a long way into day 3, and then they're setting off for a run. It's Greg Matthews who swoops at cover and nails a run out and gets rid of Alan Lamb. So this is where things start to get quirky and interesting. So the first night, Craig McDermott had Tim Robinson, the opener, caught at slip. Second day, he's got Gooch LBW, Gower caught behind. Day 3, Lamb gets run out, and then Botham hooks McDermott to fine leg. So McDermott's got all of the 4 wickets to fall to a bowler so far. Gatting gets to his 100. He's hooking a lot in this innings, apparently. He's batting with the keeper, Paul Downton, who goes on to be an administrator later. And then eventually on 160, he's caught behind. That's McDermott's 5th wicket. And then John Embry's having a bit of a whack. McDermott bowls Downton. He bowls Edmonds. He bowls Allett. And they're 9 down with Agnew 2 not out, having faced a few balls when a declaration comes in. So they're 482 for 9, but McDermott has taken all 8 of the wickets to fall to a bowler. So there's 8 for and then a bunch of zeros in the wickets columns in the bowling analysis, which is a very, very unusual one to see. Day 4, it's about an hour to lunch. Australia are 225 behind, so not in a good spot when the English innings wraps up. Greg Matthews comes in and opens the batting to change things around. Lasts a bit over an hour, does a job. Lets Kepler Wessels come in at number 3, which is what he wanted to do. He makes an even 50 very slowly, batting at 3. Hilditch makes 40, so they put on a chunk of runs and they bat for a decent chunk of time, which helps Australia's cause. But then they're both out. David Boone gets out cheaply. It's Edmonds and Embry, the spinners, who are taking the wickets here on day 4. Australia's still 87 behind and 4 wickets down. Not in a good spot. But Alan Border and Greg Ritchie bat through to stumps. It rains through the first session of the 5th day, and then Border comes out and bats through the rest of the day. One of his great rear guards, 146 not out, faces 334 balls, a Bradman of balls faced. And Wayne Phillips has the curious innings where he makes 39 off 130 balls, but the first 50 of those he doesn't score. Just goes out there and blocks 50 balls in a row, and then once they're safe, he whacks 6 fours at the end of the day just to cheer himself up a bit. So yes, Thompson, the pace legend who went too far, who comes back and plays in the next game at Birmingham, takes 1 for 101 there, having taken 3 for 166 at Leeds, which pushed that average up. We've talked about his average of 28.00 plenty of times on the show, but he added almost a whole run to that. It was just over 27 before those last 2 test matches.
Should be 28.
That he played.
Should be 28.01 when they move to the Collins model of how they do averages instead of a weird Wisden way. Not that I'd criticise Wisden too often, but on that front, I'm with mathematics done conventionally, rounding up the way it's normally done, not the way that it's done in cricket terms.
But, I mean, we've talked about Geoff Thompson so much on the show that he's just too big a subject to talk about here. But I suppose we could say that it was fascinating, I think, for both of us, Adam, in Barbados to run into Greg Bush at the races, of all places. We had that day off because the day finished early. So we thought, well, there was a race meet happening and we might as well go and see what this is about. Going to a track in Barbados, which is probably not what I'd be doing in Australia, but interesting to pass the time doing something different. It's incongruous. I know they have the horses on the beach, but which is, and the racetrack's where the horses on the beach bit started off, I think. But I didn't even realise they had a track there. But yeah, we were there, and Greg Bush is the player who was playing in the first grade game that is immortalised in the Christian Ryan essay. Geoff Thompson is annoyed about the point in Tomo's career when he was bowling the fastest that he ever did and ever would again. And Greg Bush is the one who gets horribly hit by Thompson in the face when he's trying to ride the bounce of a ball that comes over the top of his gloves. So we absolutely grilled him, having run into him there and realising that he was the person in the story that we could get the story and a whole lot more out of Greg Bush. Yeah, his right eye was hanging out of its socket per that evocative write-up from Christian Ryan in the Wisden Cricket Almanac of about 2013, I want to say, or thereabouts. 2012, 2013. But he was on an army stretcher and they couldn't give him painkillers because they needed to know if he was, if something was going wrong neurologically, then they needed him to be aware of it. No, totally. It's a brutal retelling in that piece, and Greg gave us a bit of an insight that day. It's a more cheerful one. He was quite upbeat about it. Yeah, well, he told the story. He certainly liked talking about it, and not about the game. Like, he's obviously still very, very passionate. He played first grade cricket for like 20 years, and
has a long history in the game as a player and as a coach and so on. So he's got a lot to give, a lot to offer. And on days like that when you've got no real commitments, my only regret is that I couldn't really communicate with him the other way, because that was when my voice went. So I was doing my best to keep up when I was ill. But thankfully, I'm a lot better now than I was then. That's not a particularly memorable day for me. That day at the races is when I realised I'm in strife here. So anyway, there we go.
Yeah, well, it was. I did enough talking for both of us probably that day, and certainly a lot of listening as well. The things that can happen when you're on the road. That's it. That's us. It's story time 238. Thank you if you have listened all the way to the end, for listening all the way to the end. Bless you. If you want to let people know about the show, do that. Pass it on. Send it to someone who might enjoy it. Send it to someone who might want to get involved as well. Send us a pledge. If you want to renew your number, you can do that as well. If you had one before, you can go around again.
It's like renewing your vows.
Yep.
In cricketing terms, you send another pledge in. You might up it by $1 or $2, if that's the kind of way you're hardwired. And said it's a little bit more with a slightly more adventurous answer at the other side of it. All of these things are in your gift, and we're always grateful, because ultimately it doesn't matter how many people we have working with the show, we wouldn't be able to do it full stop. There'd be no show without our beloved patrons. And the next 6 months, we're going to be doing as much as we can to make the show go to the next level, and you're front and center of all of that.
Yep, get involved. You can also get the feed without the programmatic ads if you join up on Patreon too. Thanks to Maurice Blackburn for backing us and New Brew through the season. Adam, nice to see you. And you're going to go and watch a one-day international, and I am going to edit this program and put it out. Let's make it happen. This has been Story Time. We will see you. Well, we'll have a weekly show coming up early next week, and that'll probably be the next time that you hear us in your eardrums. Till then,
have a nice weekend.